Hello everyone. In today's video, we are going to build a bot scanner application using Python and PyQt5. This application will allow us to scan a range of pods on a specified target, display the results, and even export them to a file. We will go through each step of process from setting our project to implementing the scanning logic and building the graphical user interface. Let's dive in. First of all, let's create a project directory and name them bot scanner. Okay, here is our. So let's open up our code editor. You can use any code editor as I'm using Ducky. Import your project file. Okay, now let's create new file. Okay, so let's save this file as Canada.py. Here you go. Now our code, now we will type our code here. Okay, so first of all, now we need to import all the necessary libraries that we will be using in our bot scanner application. This includes libraries for network, operation, the graphical user interface, and trading. So let's get started. First, let's do with step one, import socket. So we have imported all our necessary libraries. We imported system, sockets, IP address for getting IP addresses, and we used PyQt5 for our main graphical user interface. We used Qt GUI and all these. So with these libraries imported, we now have the essentials tools need for our pod scanner. These libraries will help us to handle network connection, create a user interface, and manage our trading. So if you don't have these libraries, you can always go in command and you can type pip install. And for example, you want to install PyQt5. You don't have PyQ by default. Python doesn't have PyQt5, so you need to install it separately. You can type PyQt5 and hit enter. As I have already installed, so I'm not gonna do that. You can always use pip command. So same goes for this IP address. You can always use pip command, and for them you can always use pip command. So now next on our next step, we are going to create a custom progress bar. This progress bar will display the progress of our pod scanning in more stylish way. We will override the paint event method to show the percentage in the center. So let's get started. First I will code it, then I will explain the functions. So we have created our two functions. We have defined the functions that will override the paint event to display a percentage, and we initiate the custom progress bar, and we created the class to define our progress bar. So our custom progress bar is ready. This will provide a visual presentation of scanning process, making our application more user-friendly and visually appealing. So in our next step, we are going to define a worker thread for port scanner. Before coding, now we will define a worker thread that will handle the actual port scanning process. This is essential because we want our GUI to remain progressing while the scan is being performed. Now let's define a worker thread for port scanning. So we have created a class for scan worker, and we have defined the worker thread, the port scanning here. So in our next step, we will initialize the scan worker thread. Now let's get started. So as you can see, we have initialized the scan worker thread here. So now in our next step, we will define a stop function. So that function will stop the scan worker thread. So let's continue it. So we have created a function that will stop the scan worker. Now in our next step, we are going to create the scan progress function, to a function that will run the scan progress, okay? And then after that, I will be explaining that code. So let's get started. So okay, now let me explain this. So we created the run function to run the scan process. So what it will does is it will run this code and it will scan the process. It will scan the pods, and then we created another function to calculate the total number of pod to scan. So what it does is it calculates the total number of pod to scan when we put the number for the when we put the number range in our application, so it will scan that. So now let's get to our next step, and we will create a function to get the port numbers per host. So we have created the function, we have defined the function that gets the number of per host. Okay, so now in our next step, what we are going to do is we are going to create a function, a scan function that scan a host for open ports. So whenever we click that function, whenever we do the scanning, that will trigger and it will scan in the host for the open ports. So now let's get started. So now we have created a scan host for open port function. So in this function, what it does it scan the host for the open ports. It scanned, and what it does is it provides the result, scan result, in the form of your. It also provides the current date and time on which that scan has been occurred. It provides you in the format of year, month, date, hours, minute, and second. So we have created this scan host function for the open ports. Now in our next step, we will create the function to get the service name of the port. As till now, it is only scanning the ports and it's getting the port number. Now we will create a function to get the service name for that port. So now we have created a function to that scan the pod, that scan the individual pod and emits the results. So before that, what we did, we create another function that gave the service name for our pod. Till now, at the previous function, what we created was we created the function that scan the host for the open pod, and then after we created a function that get the service name of the pod. For example, if you are getting if there is open port, for example 80, then what this function will do is it will grab the name of that port number. So in our next step, what we did is we scan an individual pod and image the result, and we shows here. So in our next step, what we are going to do is we are going to emit the scan result. So now let's get started. So we have created the image scan result. So what it does is it provides the result in the graphical user interface layouts in the log. So if this scan is success, so it will says as when the pod is open, it will give a message saying the pod is open, and it will give the service name that which we defined here. Will we get the service name from this function? It will provide you with the service name, with the port name, and the IP address, and the timestamp. This timestamp format will always be in year, month, date, hours, minute, and second, and followed by, we did some color coding here, and followed by, it will attach the IP address for the host which we scan, and it will give the scan port number here, and then it will give the service name. If the service name is defined, well defined, it will give the service name, and if it is not defined, then it will give the unknown number. Sorry, not number. It will provide the unknown. So after it is if after the port is, if we find the open port, then it will give this. So that is, and if we didn't find any open port, so it will give us the same, it will use the same function. It will provide you with this timestamp which is same for the year, month, and day, and then it will provide you with the IP, with the port number, and the service. And so it will say the service is closed. So let's take a recap what we did till now. At the very first step, what we did, we imported all the necessary library here, system, socket, IP address, and to install it, because some of the functions, some of the libraries, they are not pre-installed, so we need to install it, and we can install using pip command in command line. And then in the next step, what we did is we defined the custom progress bar function with additional styling. Then after, what we did is we created a function, we defined a function that overrides the paint event to display a percentage in the center. And then in our next step, what we did is we defined a class scan worker that thread for port scanning. Then we defined, what we did is we initialized the scan worker thread in our next step. Then what we did, we defined a stop scan worker thread to stop our threading, to stop our scan. Then what we did, we defined the run function to scan the process. We defined the run function to scan the port scanning process. Then after, what we did, we initialized, we defined another function to calculate the total number of pod to scan. So then after what we did, we defined a function to get the pod per host, and then we defined another function to scan the host for the open pod, and then we defined another function to get this service name, the name of that pod number, and then what we did, we again created another function to scan that pod and emit the result. So after we scanning that uh, pod or that IP address or that target, then what we did, we need to create the result as well as. So and then we emit that, can we style that result in the form of timestamp followed by the IP address followed by the port and then after service name. So till now we have created this. Now in our next step, what we are going to define is we are going to create the main GUI window. Okay, so now from here, from now on, we will be working on defining our main user interface. So let's get started with our next step. And this window will contain all the elements like input field, buttons, progress bar, and the result area. And let's start by initializing the main window and setting up the basic layouts. So we have defined the class for the pod scanner for the main windows. Okay, so our main GUI window is now defined. We have set up the layout and added the various elements that the user will interact with, including the input field, buttons, and the progress bar. We will be doing that in the input field buttons, and this form is the core of our applications user interface. So now let's get started and let's initialize the user interface. This function will call other helper functions to set up different parts of the GUI. Okay, so let's get started. So we have initialized the user interface here. This user interface, we already built the specific components of our interface using such as window icon, palettes, layouts, and fields, input fields, buttons, progress bar, and much more. So now in our next step, we will set the window icon. We will set a custom icon for our application window to give it a more professional look. Let's get started with our next step. So we have defined the set window icon and our app icon will be icon.png. But as you can see, we don't have any icons here. So let's go and get our icons. So here is our icon. So we will be using this. as our icon for our application. So let's copy this and let's paste this in our folder. So as you can see here, we have our logo.icon file and we have this defined here. So in our next step, we will configure the color palette for our graphical user interface. This involves setting the background color, text color, and other style elements to ensure that our application has consistent look and it feels better. So let's get started. So now we have defined the configuration palette here. So the color palette is now configured. Our application now has a consistent and visually appealing with improved style over the user interface. We have used this color for our background and for our windows, for our buttons. And when we highlight it, we have given all these colors here, as you can see. So now this much for today. In the next video, we will be creating the functions for the central layouts.